Hey there, we'll just wait until 11:30 to get started. All right. Good almost afternoon. Good morning. This is the time set for oral argument in number 2026-009, First John 217 LLC versus the City of Boardman. I'm Board Chair Zamudio. Board Member Basham is also present today. Board Member Wilson is not present and will not be participating in this decision, in the decision in this appeal. Please mute your audio when you're not speaking. That will help with our recording quality, and this oral argument is being recorded and live streamed. I'm not aware of any pending matters in this appeal. Is there anything that the parties need to bring to our attention?
Not petitioner.
Thank you. Oral arguments total of 30 minutes. Petitioner, you have 15 minutes and may reserve up to 5 minutes for rebuttal. Would you like to reserve any time?
I'll reserve 5.
Okay. And I'll keep track of time here and ask that you also keep track of your own time. And just to note, the clock on the screen is for reference, but it's not keeping exact time. And responding, you'll have 15 minutes for your response. And I also will keep track of that time and ask that you be mindful of your time. So with that, petitioner, please state your name for the record and begin.
Ty Wyman here as attorney for the petitioner. I thank the board and council for its time and attention this morning. On my review, the case is fully briefed, and that I think puts all council here primarily to address questions that the board may have. The petitioner has cited failure to demonstrate compliance with BDC 4.1.600 sub G sub 3, and that frankly is just the core, if not the entirety of the case, that criterion. I don't see a dispute that provision applies to the decision. I think both parties agree on that. Nor do I see a dispute as to what that provision requires. It requires, in the alternative, either presently adequate public facilities, services, and transportation networks, or that those facilities, services, and networks are planned to be provided concurrently with development. Now, we briefed primarily the interpretation of those provisions, and we certainly stand on the positions that we submitted in the briefs. But the respondent has, as I read the briefs, has provided an interpretation, sort of an implied, is sort of the findings, the city's findings, set forth an implied interpretation. As described in our reply, we're willing to assume for purposes of argument that those interpretations are correct, and the two interpretations proffered by council are that, quote, the property includes existing and future park properties, and, quote, the affected area means the entire city. Still, the record fails to demonstrate compliance with either alternative in G3 as previously described. And the central deficiency comes down to record page 5, where the city decision states that city and district owned properties are, quote, are currently or can be served, end quote. And it relies for concurrency on future planning review. Quite simply, can be served does not establish present adequacy, which we believe the criterion requires, and future planning review does not establish concurrency with future development. That facilities, services, and networks planned to be provided will be concurrent with future development. As to the concurrency issue, we cited Kine v. City of Bend, just on the fact that the board addressed construction of a very similar concurrency provision and found that future adequacy review is not equivalent to facilities being planned for concurrent provision. Very simply, we cannot know the nature and extent of future land use reviews, particularly as to the load that that they will place on park and recreation facilities. And I might note, record page, I believe it's 1212, consists of some back and forth, some written back and forth between my client and senior city staff, and I'm going to read it for you. The staff response is, it speaks to purchase a property for the purposes of building a park or a trail facility. It says those future actions may be based on recommendations of the PMP, but will have specific approval processes that will need to be followed at that time. Well, we don't know what those, we don't know, frankly, even if such processes, if a land use process will be required, if it will meet the threshold of a statutory permit. And even if it does, we don't have assurance of what the criteria or even knowledge of what the criteria will be that would apply in these future land use reviews. The response brief notes that the Kine case was quasi-judicial and addressed more the adequacy of findings. It is quasi-judicial, and it did address the adequacy of findings, but nonetheless, it also addressed construction of this very similar concurrency provision. We request remand just for the purpose of the city demonstrating compliance with BDC 4.1.600 sub G sub 3. We're, to be clear, not asking, of course, for the board to dictate trail alignment or engineering details or any particular implementation mechanism. The legislative nature of the PMP does not eliminate, I think the parties agree, it does not eliminate BDC 4.1.600 G3 as a criterion. That criterion is, in my experience, relatively stringent. And because the record does not adequately demonstrate either present adequacy or concurrent provision, we think that the decision should be remanded.
Council, let me ask you about the Kine versus City of Bend case you cite. As you pointed out, that's a quasi-judicial decision. The city argues that in the context of a legislative decision that's adopting a master plan, that the concurrency requirement is satisfied differently. Can you provide some response to that?
Yeah, I don't believe, Your Honor, that it is applied in a materially different manner. And I would go to the words of the criterion itself, which is concurrent, that the facility services and networks described in the PMP must be provided. It must be shown. There must be a finding that can be provided. I want to apologize. Literally, they are washing the windows right outside of my office. So we're not playing any handball here in the office. It says that those facilities networks plan to be provided concurrently with development, and I did not read literally in the Kine case the criterion at issue quoting is planned to be provided concurrently with development of the property. So yes, the circumstances and the context do differ. I don't doubt that at all. As I iterated or suggested a bit in my argument, I find this to be I'll say a surprisingly stringent criterion for a master plan legislative, but good on the city for that. It wants to be robust in its master planning for parks.
Okay, thank you.
I'll cede my time.
Okay, no further questions from the board for petitioner. You'll have your full 5 minutes for rebuttal, and we'll turn to the city for their response. Please state your name for the record and provide your argument. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Emily Guimont, representing respondent City of Boardman. I want to quickly start by addressing how Mr. Wyman began his argument. So agree that the dispute here centers around the interpretation and application of BDC 4.1.600 sub G sub 3. I understand that for the sake of argument, Mr. Wyman is not disputing the respondent's interpretation of that particular criterion as explained in the respondent's reply brief. So I'm happy to take questions from the board on that particular point, but given that, I'm going to pivot directly into the concurrency issue that Mr. Wyman points out. So I want to take a moment to contextualize what the PMP is, Parks Master Plan, the PMP, the adoption of which is at issue here, what that is in the city's overall land use planning system. So the purpose of the PMP is to be a master planning document through which the city builds upon and formulates plans to more particularly implement the city's recreational needs as established in the city's comprehensive plan, chapter 8 of the comprehensive plan. So it's a document that evaluates needs, inventories the city's current recreational property assets, and then measures the current assets against those needs. And it concludes that there's a shortfall. City needs more recreational properties to meet the recreational needs it forecasts over the next 10 years, which is the lifespan of the PMP itself. So in that sense, the PMP is a component of the comprehensive plan. It flows from the comprehensive plan. It was produced, developed in alignment with the comprehensive plan and with the comprehensive plan's other components, like the city's transportation systems plan, for example, or the city's development code, which implements the comprehensive plan itself. So it is a high-level planning document that looks 10 years into the future. And so the city's application of the criterion that, and I agree with the petitioner that BDC 4.1.600 G3 presents two alternatives, a finding that the properties in the affected area are currently served by adequate public facilities and such, or will be served by such facilities concurrent with future development. The PMP itself focuses on future development, and it as the first version of the PMP that the city has ever had, it recognizes and the city recognized and staff recognized in the record that updates and modifications to the city's overall land use planning system will be required going forward in order to implement the goals of the PMP itself. And so through that recognition, which is in the record in the PMP itself and through the staff presentations to the Planning Commission, which the City Council adopted in its final decision, the city has gone further than express a general intent to have plans for the concurrent development of such facilities in the future. I believe that's how petitioner phrased it in the reply brief. The city doesn't have just general intent for those development plans. The PMP goes into significant detail about what those plans should be in order to implement the projects within the PMP. So, for example, the PMP references the city's transportation systems plan to ensure that properties to be used for recreational development are adequately connected to transportation systems like pedestrian access, street access, pedestrian crossings to access parks. The PMP also identifies a need to acquire properties in the future for recreational development and identifies that the city will have to adopt an acquisition policy or strategy in order to guide the acquisition of such projects from future development so that parks facilities scale as development increases. With all that, and to the question posed to petitioner about KIND's applicability in a legislative land use process, it is a poor interpretation of BDC 4.1.600G3 to require that the PMP goes into specific detail about what those exact processes are. It's a long-term planning document, as I stated. It contemplates changes to the city's overall land use planning system. It would undermine the purpose of the PMP if the PMP was to go into the detail that petitioner argues that it should in this case. I'll pause there for one moment. I'll also just circle back to set the landscape for the standard of review here. So the city's decision was a legislative land use decision. So the adequacy or inadequacy of the city's findings to support its decision aren't grounds for reversal or remand here. Instead, the proper standard is whether the record itself shows that the supports the city's application of this particular criterion. I'm happy to answer questions about how the record supports the city's interpretation of the terms within BDC 4.1.600 sub G sub 3. And I have just discussed how the record supports the application of the concurrency requirement in that same criterion. Are there any questions on that?
I understand your position to be that whenever new park facilities are planned or prepared for development, there would be some kind of land use review process under the city's code to prepare them. Can you cite any land use processes you think would likely be involved in that process?
I can't off the top of my head, but the development, so the PMP itself does not trigger any sort of development process, but the PMP establishes the projects that the city will act upon in order to achieve the PMP goals. And as you said, one of those actions is the further development of currently owned recreational properties like parks and trails and such, or the development of properties that have yet to be developed as such. And those actions will trigger the appropriate land use review processes in the code, which at this time, because the PMP is part of a larger overall update to the city's land use planning system, are not set in stone. And so it would undermine the purpose of the PMP if the city was required to firmly establish with particularity those processes at this exact time. But the PMP does express far more than a general intent. It expresses a very fleshed out process for identifying future planning needs and then tying those future planning needs to the development of uses, recreational uses within the city.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions, I will cede the rest of my time.
No further questions from the board. Thank you. We will return to petitioner for your rebuttal.
And I'm at 5 minutes, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Go ahead.
Mostly clarifications. I think that respondent articulated well its case, but I do want to be clear. If to the extent respondent suggests that the petitioner is not disputing the proffered interpretations, we did that in our petition for review. We were willing, mostly for the benefit of the board, to assume for purposes of argument that the interpretations set forth in the response brief do pass muster, to the point that the facts, the record, simply still do not demonstrate compliance with this criterion. So I would be clear about that. On the plan showing more than general intent, council referred to future planning actions. And I do want to cite page 137 of the record. And I think that it is meaningful because if I can find it here, I'd be able to quote it. But what it does, it specifies the need for, at the bottom of record page 137, and this is in the PMP itself. It describes an implementation priority, adopt trail corridor dedication standards in the subdivision code. And so I think going somewhat to Judge Basham's question here to council, we're not even at a point where, well, we don't have those subdivision or other land use applications, so that we can identify the the dedications that might be justifiable under Dolan. We don't even, apparently the city has not provided even the code on which such subdivisions would be judged. And so that's where we just find that this concurrency requirement has just simply not been met. Lastly, I would note that I thought I understood council and the response brief to sort of say there's no findings requirement in legislative. That is not my recollection. My recollection is that even legislative, you need sufficient findings to at least advise the board as to what the decision maker was thinking. We cited Hyler, I saw in our brief, and I was trying to check to confirm that Hyler was a legislative decision. But I just want to object to a notion that the city was under no findings requirement. I understand that there was not a statutory or apparently code mandate for findings, but still there's sort of a practical need for findings to explain to the board the decision maker's intent. With that, barring questions, I am concluded.
No further questions from the board. Thank you. That will conclude oral argument. The statutory due date for a decision in this appeal is August 31st. We'll ask the parties to agree to an extension so that we issue our decision by September 21st. Is that okay with these parties?
Yes.
Respondent agrees.
Thank you.